Hey everybody, welcome to Health Ignited, where we're discussing igniting your health freedoms to live a long, healthy life full of vitality, balanced hormones, and lots of brain energy.
Talking about one of my favorite topics today, which is hormones. There's always lots to say because, as we know, these little hormones are little communicators and they carry messages for us all over the body from our environment and essentially dictate our life.
Yeah. So I'm going to be interviewing you on this podcast because you just completed your book, and it's going to be ready in a few months from now. Resale is going to be going live in a few months, and so you've got a chance to really dive into this stuff, or we both have, over the last 10 years. But obviously, you've taken a lot further in your book writing. So I think where I'd like to start asking questions is regarding, like, the most common thing for so many women is PMS. What's happening?
So there's different things happening for different women. So essentially, when you look at your menstrual cycle, it's going to range from anywhere from 28 to 35 days. And that first half of our cycle, which is our follicular phase, is dictated by estrogen and FSH and then LH rising so that we can ovulate. And then there's like a little tiny surge of testosterone right around ovulation to get your mojo up. And then estrogen starts to fall so that progesterone can go up, which is more of that nurturing hormone that nourishes our body. And if there's no pregnancy, then we will shed that lining that was created in the first half. So that's kind of the rhythm in which the body wants to move in. But what happens is life. So when there's stress, the luteal phase can be affected because
luteal phase, just for listeners, second half.
Yeah. And reason being is that our progesterone gets converted into cortisol when we're under stress. So different things like even traveling or exercising certain ways, or just, life stress can start to affect how much progesterone we have as a reserve moving into that luteal phase. And when we don't have enough and estrogen is taking over, and not necessarily our estrogen that the body needs for our skin or our cardiovascular system and to kind of give us that support for our hormones, it's usually the xenoestrogens from the environment that are coming in and kind of creating havoc in the ratio between these two hormones in that last half of our cycle.
And the two hormones being
estrogen and progesterone.
Yeah. So can you explain a little bit about what are xenoestrogens?
So these estrogens, what they do is, so we have our cells in our bodies and we have receptors sitting on top of them waiting for our true estrogen to come in. So estradiol, if you're a menstruating woman. So it's waiting, but these xenoestrogens will have the same chemical compounding as this estradiol. So they mimic this estradiol, which confuses the receptors, and they will take place in that parking space, as you will, so that it will make it look like you have estrogen, but you actually don't. And it's hard for the liver to differentiate between the two. And then if, say, somebody has an inflamed gut or has been dealing with constipation, it's really hard for the body to get rid of these xenoestrogens, which then start to recirculate in the system. So then every month your body's trying to get rid of these excess estrogens, but it's having a difficult time because if the environment doesn't change, the stimulus isn't changing, and therefore the xenoestrogens are basically taking over rather than your estradiol, which is the one that's needed for our hormonal support.
Yeah. So, so far, like, it can sound a little complicated with, the monthly cycle and everything. But, I think you did a good job of explaining, where these, quote unquote, bad estrogens can come from, these xenoestrogens. And there's actually some really interesting information. A tyrosine, which is actually used in certain rice crops and things like that in farming, has been shown as is xenoestrogen. So this is stuff that's in standard food supply food that we're consuming. And in these salamander models, it actually converted male salamanders into female, and it's because this high amount of this tyrosine, which is acting like this estrogen in the body.
So that tells us it's not just a female problem. Like, yes, we're talking about our menstrual cycle and PMS, but really a lot of men now are dealing with excess estrogen, which is causing weight gain. It's causing erectile dysfunction. It's causing prostate issues. So we're not the only ones that are affected, and especially young kids. So young girls are developing a lot earlier. and young boys aren't, their sperm counts are going to be affected. So these things are happening around us because of our environment.
Yeah. And so it's pervasive, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's, that when you hear this, though, it can get a little gloomy,
Right.
as you think, like, how am I supposed to avoid it?
Mm-hmm.
So, can you avoid it, or
Mm-hmm.
what are you supposed to do about
Yeah.
it?
Well, there's certain things that you can control and there's certain ones that you can't. So things that you can control are the food choices. So making sure that we're eating organic food, how we're storing our food. Are we using stuff that has BPA or even BPS, which is the sister of BPA, like canned foods, or storing in plastic? These little micro decisions that we make every single day are going to have a profound effect in the rest of our lives. So just being aware of the xenoestrogens that are in our environment. Women put on tons of products first thing in the morning, so we're being exposed right away. So looking at the products that you're using, are they going to disrupt hormone function? And right now you can go on EWG and you can look at the Environmental Workers Group website and put your products in there to see if there are high amounts of xenoestrogens. So you can start making changes in like every room of your home, and also the things that you're using, so that you can control some parts of your environment.
Okay, cool. So getting back to the monthly cycle again, and we have these imbalances between estrogen and progesterone, and then we mentioned at the beginning, like, tell me about PMS. So like these imbalanced ratios are going to lead to some disruption in a woman's monthly cycle.
Mm-hmm. So when there is that imbalance and progesterone again isn't getting to do its job in the last half of our cycle, things like breast tenderness may show up, irritability may show up, or like extreme sadness. That's another one. And then when the flow comes, for some women, the flow ends up being really, really heavy. So you're seeing clots in your flow, maybe there's cramping, and there's just a lot of discomfort. And that's happening every single month. So when we start detoxifying these estrogens, when we start looking at some of the triggers that are causing this, that too starts to shift. Then the luteal phase, which is that last half of our cycle, will get the right amount of progesterone it needs to actually nourish the body. And so it doesn't feel like the body's working against us.
Yeah. So why is it that some people benefit from birth control pills, and what would be the reason to add those in?
So that tends to complicated question.
Well, the reason I'm bringing it up is because a lot of times women may have these symptoms, and then they just know, oh, I'll just take the birth control pill.
Yeah. So reason why it may help is that it's regulating that progesterone piece. So many women will go on progestin and they will feel better. And what's happening is you're not necessarily getting a true bleed at the end of the month, you're getting a letdown. And what that means is you're taking these high amounts of hormones, even in like mini pills, there's still hormones in there, and they're synthetic. So they don't look as your hormones do in your body. And it's correcting your cycle in a sense that it's dictating what your hormones are doing. So for the first 21 days, you're taking these hormones, so there's no fluctuations now. And then you stop taking the pill for 7 days, and now you're just getting a letdown bleed because now the hormones are dropping. So the signal for the uterus to release the endometrium is through this like massive drop in hormones. So it's like mimicking this cycle, but not necessarily, because you're taking the same hormone every single day. So you're not getting that fluctuation of the estrogen or the progesterone. So some people will have skin issues as like one of their PMS challenges, and then they will be put on estrogen based hormone pills and do a lot better. And then all of a sudden the skin is cleared up. And that's because the xenoestrogens have been taking over. So we're still masking the problem, not necessarily getting rid of the triggers that were creating the problem in the first place. So it can give women relief in the beginning. And the thing to understand about birth control, I'm not against it. I'm not for it. I'm not against it. I think it's important to understand them. There's different generations of hormones. Many people think that when they're taking a progesterone only pill that they're just taking progestin, but really they come from testosterone. So then all of a sudden their testosterone is getting disrupted because they're getting their receptors in their body is now getting this impulse from the hormone pill as well. So there's many different things to look at. So if you don't feel good on one, you want to make sure you know what generation it is, what it's doing in your body, and some of the depletion that happens with the pill.
Yeah. And we're going to have to do a separate podcast on
This
all
is a
of these
whole other
components
thing.
because it's a whole other thing. But
Yeah.
I think it's important because that usually becomes the Band-Aid tool for PMS, is to just go, okay, well, I'll take the pill, everything will go away. And it's funny because after you see women and you help them understand more about their cycle, like they now can feel empowered because they've got control, and their body's not, dictating everything, and they're actually in harmony with their body.
That's right. And then you can make a decision, because if you're in that phase in your life where you can't have children or don't want children, you're working on your career, you go into school, or things are happening and you need some form of birth control, as long as you are tuned in, and then you can actually make a decision that's going to benefit your body.
Yeah, because I think too many times, in not just with birth control pill, but we make decisions based on convenience before we make decisions on what it's gonna, the impact of what it's gonna do to the body. So, we talked about estrogen and progesterone. Let's talk about like the libido hormone and the mojo hormone, the testosterone for women, and maybe we can bring in some of our own experiences with each other. But there tends to be some times in the month where women have a really strong libido, and when there's not, and it's interesting how that change in these hormones really play a huge role in interest and desire. And when they're not there, it's kind of like, well, that mojo is gone. And yet the partner can have a different expectation, right?
Yeah, I think this is really important to understand, because what happens in relationship, or even relationship itself, is you start to feel like something's wrong with you. Like, why is my libido not high all the time? So the first half of our cycle, especially right after the bleed, you'll start to notice your cervical mucus is different. Reason being, because now your hormones are changing, estrogen is starting to rise, and alongside it, testosterone is also starting to come up to increase interest, so that when the egg, when there is ovulation, then creation can happen. So that first half, you will notice that if you're not on the pill and you're regularly cycling, you'll notice that there's more interest. You'll notice that you're paying more attention to maybe even how you feel and how you look, and there's more energy. Your energy is more outward and you're more outgoing, and maybe you can even exercise a little bit more. You can fast a little bit more. There's that first half of your cycle is all about action. The moment the egg is released, 24 to 48 hours afterwards, progesterone is starting to go up. That is the nurturing hormone. That one's more internal. It wants you to just nourish yourself. It's creating like this cushion, an environment for the egg to be implanted. So it's all about nesting. It's not about being outward. So it's more about slowing down, eating a little bit more higher carb diet, not exercising as much, or changing the way you're exercising. So maybe you're going for walks or doing yoga. So it's a lot more of an internal experience. So then the libido is going to be lower, because we're waiting to see if this egg was fertilized and if it's going to stay. And once it doesn't, and it starts to release, and that's where the period comes. So that first half of the cycle really is where there's going to be more libido.
Yeah. And then interesting, like, I think if we were all taught this in relationship school, because everyone goes to relationship school before they get married, to learn about the hormonal cycle of their partner. But I mean, that's super important, because I find that often I reference back to Sonya's cycle to see where, fluctuations in mood or irritability or, time alone.
And not always in the best way, because he's used it against me too.
Yeah, I mean, and again, she would take it that way because she's at a certain stage in her cycle, maybe.
There it is.
But this is the interesting dynamic, really, is to, as you get to know yourself, you can become a conduit to help teach your partner a little bit more about I'm feeling a little bit more internal right now, or or maybe as your partner changes their outward expression of like feeling like they want to be more outgoing, like that tends to coincide, like you said, with this rise in testosterone. And so knowing yourself helps your partner to understand you a little bit better, because men are a completely different story, right? We fluctuate our hormonal levels much more, with much more volatility than women do, where it's more somewhat
There's
more predictable. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think that is really important to understand, so that expectations are met on both sides. so that there is like a deeper understanding of what's going on. So things aren't taken personal, and then there's a rhythm within the relationship too.
Yeah. And so that doesn't mean like intimacy is off limits in the second half of the cycle, but it just may mean that the man or the masculine part in the relationship, whatever that may be, needs to find more creative ways to be in that nurturing space, right? And maybe it does differ a little bit more. I mean, we see so many people of so many different types that are really challenged by libido, are really challenged by in intimacy, and they feel a lot of rejection, or they feel discouragement because libido is not there. And you know, there's a cycle going on, there's toxicity stresses going on, there's emotional stresses, there's life, there's a boatload of stuff that lead to that, you know, that state change in your hormone profile, right?
Yeah, and you think about like behavioral endocrinology and hormone states for men and women. For women, it's oxytocin, like the hormone of connection. So if a woman is feeling disconnected with herself or her community or her partner, it's going to be harder to tap into that state. And for men, it's testosterone. So if they're feeling like they're not on purpose or living a life that gives them that feeling of being in action and getting the job done, they too are not going to be in that same state. So I think the more conversations we can have around that, the easier it becomes to understand each other.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, you know, again, getting back into the male energy, you know, when there is that lack of purpose, that lack of drive, that lack of production, or, you know, something to fix, you know, whatever the calling is for the man, yeah, this sense of purpose does deplete, and it can be a huge rock to confidence. And it does show up in the physiology of the biochemistry with the hormone depletion. I mean, we're seeing, like you mentioned, dropping sperm counts. There's a natural decline of testosterone and progesterone from the age of 25 to 40 by up to 50%. You know, people snacking all day long and higher carbohydrates interfere with some of these testosterone levels and progesterone. So, you know, there's a lot of, you know, variables that are impacting hormones, which impact your behavior.
And then impact your life and your relations.
And it's interesting because we, you know, in that state, often we're blaming our partner. You know, we're blaming things outside of us, and not recognizing that you know, we generally feel better when our hormones are more balanced.
Or sometimes you recognize it and you still want to blame them.
Is that a poke? Yeah. So yeah, I think, you know, in this discussion, our hope really is that, you know, bringing in awareness to a woman's monthly cycle. You know, what are some of the disruptive forces that can show up that create dysregulation and PMS and some of those other things, and to know yourself more intimately on the level of, you know, libido and desire for life and vitality and confidence. You know, it may be cyclical in your month, and it's okay if you're having you know, some slower, more nurturing days. It's just, that's part of the cycle, right?
Yeah, it'll build more compassion for yourself, because life doesn't change with our cycle, unfortunately. But if you're feeling slower one week, there's a reason behind it. If you're feeling more motivated another week, there's a reason behind it. So the more you learn and the more self-discovery that you do, the easier it becomes to be compassionate.
Yeah. And you're not broken. You don't have to,
you're not broken.
You don't have to fix everything, right? Sometimes it's just part of life.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. Good discussion.
Yeah. And we're gonna come back with another discussion at some point, diving into birth control pill a little bit more, because that's a really, really important one for women, and men to know about their women. So we'll dive into that on a future one.
That's right.
That's all.